The following program is in no way intended to replace your doctor's advice or treatment program, nor should it be used as a tool for the purpose of self-diagnosis.
Good evening and welcome to another edition of Your Health, Your Choice. Today, April 25th, is designated National DNA Day. So we have a little bit on medicine today to share with you on that. But our main topic this evening is going to be the complications of diabetes. We have with us, as usual, Dr. Claude Khan.
Good to be here.
Diabetologist, community health expert. And we're going to, before we discuss the complications of diabetes, because if you remember, on our last program, we looked at the ABCs of diabetes. I'll just put my little manipulative up here if you can catch it. So A, referring to your A1C test, B, your blood pressure, and C, your cholesterol. We discussed that in quite a bit of detail. Not sure if Nicholas is getting this quite clear on the screen because it's reflecting on the light. So having looked at that, the ABCs of diabetes, we're now going to focus this evening on the complications of diabetes. But on Medicine Today, let's pay tribute to someone who contributed so much to DNA and as its National DNA Day. So DNA research, we have a little clip that we want to share with you based on the National Genome Institute's research. And if Josh can bring that up for us.
February 12th is the 200th anniversary of the birth of Charles Darwin, the British naturalist who invented the concepts that we now call evolution. We are here at a scientific workshop sponsored by the National Human Genome Research Institute, where some of the world's leading geneticists are discussing the genetic factors that cause disease. Let's see if they think whether Charles Darwin's discoveries are still relevant to today's research.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Very much so. Darwin was really a pioneer person in terms of telling us how we are all related, and not just human beings across the planet, but how we are actually related, to things that we didn't think we were related to.
Practiced every day in clinical medicine.
He provided the first, I should say, synthesizing view of modern biology, which in his words were survival of the fittest, but that wasn't the only one, but really in trying to say that structure begets function. And he gave us a reason as to how that function comes about over time.
I think the coolest thing is that he tackled something that everyone assumed was true. And everyone assumed that species were relatively fixed over time, and had been so for many, many, many generations. And what he showed is that there's a spectrum of difference among different species, and that spectrum changes over time. So things are constantly changing and shifting, and the power of biology is based on those changes in DNA and genes, which we see in different species and in health and disease every day.
His discovery really set the stage for what we are currently doing in terms of understanding human relationship, human history, and in our relationship to lower organisms around the world.
His theory and thinking is very, very relevant, not only to the study of biology and understanding biology, but also in understanding human disease. The first, which I don't think we think about, but we use his name all the time, which is Darwin's concept of natural selection, and is often simplified into survival of the fittest.
Okay, so National DNA Day. I know the whole concept of Darwin and evolution is quite a controversial one within certain spiritual and religious fraternities. But what are your opinions on, say, for example, the relationship between genetics and disease and health?
Well, yes, I know there's always been that controversial debate over creation and evolution, but I don't think we really want to get into that today, because the two are not always as exclusive as we think they are. And I know that might be controversial to someone, because some people out there, because I believe that personally that yes, God created all living things, but there has been a degree of evolution over the years. We have adapted to our environments, etc. So I don't think the two are
mutually exclusive.
I don't think and we had this debate in our university days where the creationists, as they were called, were put up against the evolutionists, and
in
it was in a debate at university at UWI. This was in the 80s, and it was quite a interesting phenomena that the creationists, as they were called, were able to talk about creation from a scientific point of view. So I don't think the two are exclusive. I think there's a certain degree of evolution within a particular species, but I personally don't believe that one species can evolve into another. Where genetics is concerned, of course, diabetes is a good example of how the genome can be, and a lot of research is going into this area, identifying certain aspects of the genome that will make someone more susceptible to diabetes and certain types of diabetes. We know that there are certain genetic mutations that can make you susceptible to particular subtypes of diabetes. So although we talk about type 1, type 2 diabetes, gestational diabetes, there are certain, different, what is called MODY, M-O-D-Y, maturity onset of diabetes in the young, where there are certain genetic mutations. And as a result of that, if that can be identified at an early stage, the way you treat that patient is completely different to if you think they're just necessarily type 1. So genetics, I think, for diabetes, for cancers, certain types of cancers, there are certainly genetic links. So I think there are lots of different areas of medicine where genetics it's very important.
And one of the important theories that the National Genome Research Institute was highlighting was the fact that Darwin did mention, several centuries ago now, that cells are constantly changing.
Yes.
How would that connect with health and disease?
Well, this is an interesting phenomenon because, again, coming back to my favorite area of diabetes, we know that there's the what is called the thrifty genotype hypothesis, where people who move from an environment where food was relatively difficult to come by, the hunting, gathering existence, or the caveman existence, to a state of plenty. So we have the example of the Pima Indians who migrated from Mexico to San Antonio, Texas, and from almost no diabetes in 50 to 60 years, there's almost a 50% prevalence of diabetes in that community.
Because they're eating very highly processed
foods. And what happens is that the genetic predisposition is unmasked because of the environment. So cells are changing, but we are recognizing that environmental factors that cause a trigger in that,
Right, so just a quick reminder that today is National DNA Day, so we thought we would feature a bit about Darwin and genetics. Moving on to our second topic, the importance of exercise. And I think Josh has a little clip for us to demonstrate that.
Which item in this picture do you think negatively affects people's health more than anything else? Alcohol, cigarettes, the donut, hamburger. Sure, they're all pretty bad for you, but most people know that and at least try to limit their intake somewhat to these items, even a little bit. But it's the things we don't think about that can really cause damage. Things we use every day so regularly we don't even think about how its constant use could actually be killing us. The real culprit is the chair. We were given legs for a reason. Most third world cultures don't even have chairs, and they walk an average of 10 miles a day. We in the modern world, on the other hand, spend most of our entire waking days sitting down. People go right from bed to sitting on the toilet, after which they sit at the breakfast table, then they sit in the car as they drive to work and spend the entire day sitting at a desk, only getting up to sit in the toilet and in the cafeteria. Then they sit in the car to drive and sit at the local bar for happy hour. Then when they've had enough of that, they go drive home and spend the rest of the day sitting in a comfortable chair watching TV before they crawl to bed to recover from all the physical exertion that day. And when people go out, they sit at a restaurant or a movie theater. Sitting all day is far worse for you than you might think. A 2010 American Cancer Society study following over 123,000 people from 1993 to 2016 found these alarming results. People who were inactive and sat for over 6 hours a day were 94% more likely to die during the time period studied than those who were physically active and sat less than 3 hours a day. That's almost 100%. And get this, findings were independent of physical activity levels. The negative effects of sitting were just as strong in people who exercised regularly. 60%, that's over half of employees surveyed, were convinced they would be more productive if they had the option to work on their feet. Medical experts have started referring to long periods of physical inactivity and its negative consequences as sitting disease. Below this video are links to an endless list of medical studies showing physical inactivity and low fitness are serious threats to cardiovascular health. Even with a low body fat index, sitting has been linked to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Studies showing differences in brachial and femoral artery responses to prolonged sitting. Studies showing reducing sedentary time may protect DNA. Sedentary lifestyle has been linked to depression. How sitting less increases muscle mass. Multiple studies linking diabetes to inactivity and sitting. Cells in idle muscles don't respond well to insulin, so the pancreas produces more and more, leading to diabetes. And how 5 minutes of standing every half hour can improve glucose metabolism and really help postmenopausal women who are pre-diabetic. Blood pressure drops when standing compared to sitting. A Cornell University study found that sitting more than 1 hour induces biochemical changes in lipoprotein lipase activity, that's an enzyme involved in fat metabolism, and glucose metabolism, leading to deposits of fats in adipose tissue rather than being metabolized by muscle, and increases heart attack risk, coronary heart disease, and kidney disease. This happens in both fit people who do regular aerobic activity and also unfit overweight people. This means regular exercise does not cancel out these effects of sitting the rest of the day. Sitting a lot is asking for trouble, no matter who you are.
Okay, so sedentary lifestyles and how they affect us generally. I was quite intrigued by that 5 minutes of standing every half an hour. And of course, you know, the relevance to your specialty, diabetes. And insulin production. And
I mean, the question is, you know, whether people can put this into practice, because if you're in an office where you're expected to sit in front of a desk, or say if you're in a call center, working at a call center, and you're taking calls, will your managers allow you to stand every half an hour for 5 minutes?
Should we be making it mandatory then, that for health purposes, that you do get up every half an hour for 5 minutes?
Well, I remember a few years ago, we went to Boston for a diabetes course. We, Jocelyn Diabetic Center, and one of the sessions was an exercise. And in fact, they showed some really interesting diagrams of people at their workplace actually on a treadmill at their desk, but on a treadmill.
Moving, yeah.
Or having a meeting, but they're on a cycle, one of those standing cycles. Stationary bikes. So they're cycling and they're having a meeting. Now, that's quite modern thinking, but you know, if you can't actually get up from your desk every half an hour, is it?
Yeah.
Which you know, really, I don't think that's possible for a lot of people in there. But I think the information is important. It shows how important exercise and keeping active is for our overall health. And, you know, we keep saying to patients, and at the start of all my clinics now, most of my clinics, I try to give a 15-minute talk saying to patients that giving tablets or medication is not the answer to every medical problem.
Yeah, it is about lifestyle.
Lifestyle
as well.
changes are important.
So, you know, it's exercise, but also combined with a good diet.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Wrapping up our first segment, and we go to our break now. Welcome back to Your Health, Your Choice. And before the break, we were looking at two particular aspects on Medicine Today, but we've overrun our time for Medicine Today. So I'll leave the third topic for next program. This evening, we want to focus on the complications of diabetes. Yes. The World Health Organization has actually termed it a deadly disease, deadly diabetes. 1 in 11 adults are affected by it. Most of us know the statistics by now. But this evening, we want to focus on short-term complications of diabetes.
And long-term, if we have time.
If we have time, we'll work on the long-term complications. So if you do have any questions, the number is 652-4855, and Dr. Carnwell will be very, very happy to hear from you and to try to answer any concerns that you do have. But first of all, what are the differences between short-term complications and long-term ones? So
when we talk about long-term complications of diabetes, we're talking about someone who's had diabetes for maybe more than 10 to 15 years. And there are changes in the small and larger blood vessels. So long-term complications can be divided into what we call microvascular complications and macrovascular complications. But the short-term complications can set in fairly early in diabetes. And the first one that is of increasing concern is what we call hypoglycemia.
Okay, and if you
define hypoglycemia. So hypoglycemia is basically a low blood sugar. And we used to think in years gone by that hypoglycemia was a fairly innocent, not something to be worried about. But over the last 5 years in particular, several trials have been published that shows that hypoglycemia can have fairly serious consequences. I'll talk about that a little bit, but what kind of blood sugar reading we're talking about? If your blood sugar falls below roughly about 70 milligrams per deciliter, that's defined as a hypoglycemic event.
When do you do these measurements?
Well, that's interesting because, you know, one of the challenges we have is to get people to do blood sugar readings. Not many people like to get their finger pricked.
No, they don't.
Right. And sometimes I prick my finger in to see what my blood sugar reading is, and it could be a little bit painful. Unfortunately, we expect our diabetics to be doing some home blood sugar readings, especially if they're on insulin. And you can either do your blood sugar first thing in the morning, or we often ask patients to do their blood sugars 2 hours after eating. That's a very important reading because quite often the first reading on a morning is quite normal, and patients then come to clinic and the blood sugars are 300 and 400 and they're surprised, but they never do a blood sugar reading 2 hours after eating. So all our diabetics who are listening, and we know we have a fairly wide viewing audience, we would like you to do some readings 2 hours after eating.
Every meal?
No. I wouldn't expect patients to be doing 4 readings every day. What I would say is that if we're changing medication or if we're putting people onto insulin, maybe for the first 2 or 3 weeks, it would be a good idea to do up to 4 readings a day. If you're on tablets and you're fairly well controlled, then you probably don't even need to do a reading every day, maybe 3 or 4 times a week. The important thing, though, is if you feel you are having symptoms of a hypoglycemic event, then you really should do a blood sugar reading.
Okay, so what are these symptoms?
So 2 things I want to say, Linda, about that is that people often ring. We've put them on medication, their blood sugars are coming down. As doctors, nurses, we're happy, and patients then come back and tell us they're feeling unwell. They're feeling shaky, they're feeling nervous. I ask, well, what are your blood sugars? It's 100. Well, actually 100 is a normal blood sugar reading. So the question is, why would someone who's diabetic, we bring their blood sugars under good control, they start feeling as if they are going hypoglycemic? Why?
Yeah, why?
Good question, Linda. The reason for that is sugar is addictive, as you always remind me. Sugar acts on the addictive centers in the brain. So if you've been running blood sugars of 250, 300 for a year or 2, your body gets used to those high readings, and you actually can get a buzz from those high readings. And if we try to bring your blood sugars down too quickly, and say we bring your blood sugars down to 100 overnight, you begin to feel hypoglycemic. And especially if we put you on insulin, you begin to feel hungry. Insulin can stimulate your appetite, and you start feeling these symptoms. Unfortunately, we can't bring up the slides tonight.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, but you can feel weak.
Right. I'm seeing cold sweat and clamminess.
Yes.
Shakiness, hunger, irritability.
Yes.
Headaches, dizziness, trouble concentrating, and lightheadedness.
Right. Now, I mean, those are quite general, a lot. So we have to be careful when patients tell us this, that we don't blame a hypoglycemic event. But, you know, the question would be, why would someone be feeling like this? Well, if you are on tablets or if you're on insulin and you miss a meal. So one of the things we have to remind diabetics is that to avoid hypoglycemic events, you have to eat small, regular meals. Very important.
Yeah.
The tendency in Trinidad is that we have, you know, a big breakfast, a big lunch, and a big dinner. A lot of people, but really you should be having small meals spread throughout the day.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are much more aware now of eating habits, and you know, what is the quotation? You have breakfast like a king, lunch like a, I don't know, and dinner like a pauper.
Pauper.
Yeah.
But a lot of people find that difficult to stick to because I personally, if I have a very big breakfast, I feel very lethargic. And it's the start of the day. That's just me. So while that is good advice, and I think we should be trying to follow it, I generally don't have a big breakfast. But I'm not saying that people should follow that. I think, you know, you should try and start the day with a good
Or even
breakfast.
if you're, for some of us, maybe the first meal of the day is at lunch. So you have a big meal first thing, and then you start whittling down the portions for the next 2 or 3 meals of the day.
Yes. So you
Our
have
body rhythms are
different.
vary
Yes.
depending on the kind of work that we do. If people are working shift and they're sleeping at different hours, or if you're a night owl as opposed to an early bird in terms of your body rhythms, then you know it would vary as well.
Right. So eating regularly. The other thing, though, is taking too much medication.
Yeah.
Now, that's a big problem because we have, especially elderly patients. I remember about 2 weeks ago, I had a patient coming into me, and they were telling me they were taking a certain amount of insulin, which was twice the amount that we had prescribed. Now, I think that patient misunderstood how to pull up the insulin, and unfortunately, I had some slides of syringes, etc., and I'll try and sort that out for the next program. But if you overdose, then your blood sugars can go low.
Right.
And especially if people have visual problems, you know, pulling up insulin from a bottle can be very, very difficult because the measurements on those syringes are very tiny. So you can very easily make a mistake.
Why don't the pharmaceutical companies do some? I mean, you know that the majority of diabetes patients will ultimately have some kind of eye problems. Why do they make these labels so tiny and make it so difficult for diabetic patients to deal with the problem?
Well, they don't actually, Linda, because we do have devices. When we were in the UK, you have diabetic pens that are for visually impaired.
Right.
So
I haven't seen those here.
No, well, we have insulin pens available in Trinidad, which are much easier to use. You can dial up the insulin, and it actually clicks. So you can go 2, 4, 6, 8. But in the UK and in the US, you even have better devices where there are very big markings that are visible. So it's a good question you're making here, Linda, because, you know, we have had this debate about the availability of drugs. And, you know, I want to come back to this because we're still struggling a bit. There is a problem with the supply of drugs. It's a little bit better over the last few weeks, insulin availability. But, for example, insulin pens, which I believe would be very useful for a lot of our patients, it's simply not available on the government service. So we are still stuck with vials and syringes. And I have to tell you, I mean, the syringes and the needles are awfully large. And you're asking patients, some of my patients are on 4 injections a day. And to stick yourself 4 times a day with these big needles, it's quite a challenge. Whereas the insulin pens, and I am an advocate for these new devices. You know, there's some people out there who are very skeptical of change.
Well, yeah.
No, that goes across the board.
I think the older we get, the harder it is to accommodate ourselves to change.
Well, maybe I'm like that in certain areas of my life, but especially in church life and in medicine, I am a big proponent of new devices, of advances. And, you know, for example, we had a big debate about the availability of a long-acting insulin called Lantus, which was available on the government service. And to my knowledge, we have not been informed formally, but I will say it publicly. I had loads of my patients, a lot of my patients. I was one of the biggest users of Lantus, and it's been pulled from the government service. And we are now in a situation where there's a chaotic change because we were not officially informed. Lantus is no longer available. We're changing patients to 70/30 to N, but they still have bottles of Lantus, and patients come back in and they're using Lantus, they're using NPH, and then they're going hypo.
Yes.
Because patients are confused. Taking insulin is confusing enough. So, you know, I think the government needs to inform us precisely what's happening, because Lantus is a better insulin than 70/30 or NPH. Yes, it is much more expensive. And if we are in an economic downturn, we will have to expect some changes. But what we are saying is that where hypoglycemic events are concerned, that some of the newer insulins are better at preventing hypos than some of the older insulins.
Yeah, I mean, the point has to be made too that, you know, we are at an epidemic proportion. It has been admitted, the Ministry of Health has admitted that this is a non-contagious disease that is at a chronic level. Not just diabetes, but obesity and hypertension.
That was one of the things
it was one of the things we were going to mention on medicine today.
Yes.
So if by the Minister of Health's own admission just a few days ago that diabetes, hypertension, and obesity are chronic issues in the country, why then are we not making the medications available?
Well, so this is an excellent point of debate, because I think it's very short-sighted if we understand that making medications available to patients and good management of diabetes, hypertension, hyperlipidemia can prevent the complications of diabetes. You're going to save the health economy millions of dollars as a result of saving people from amputations, heart disease, dialysis, etc. So,
so the costs of prevention is much less than the cost of treatment.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's why our community-based diabetes programs are so important, because we are in the Southwest region. We have moved a lot of the diabetes care out into the communities where people are. The clinics are nearer to where patients live. They can access the service a little bit easier. It's not as crowded. They're seeing someone with a specialist, a subspecialty interest in diabetes, but we are having problems accessing medication. Now, of course, the other bit of this is our ongoing fight with the herbal community. And I say fight because, just Sunday morning, I saw an extensive advert for something called Optimal Wellness Center, where it's claimed that people, experts from the US are coming down, and you have all these fancy detox devices and scanning devices and blood scans where you can see your blood cells, and people are making these diagnoses. Today on the radio, I was coming back from one of my clinics in the central area, and I heard on one of our Christian radio stations someone really very aggressively publicizing a particular product that she said could heal about 20 diseases. Now,
no one product can do that.
No one product can do that. So we have patients, unfortunately. Even today, I was being asked about certain herbal products, and I was being asked about merengue.
No, I haven't heard of that one.
Right.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I'm not sure about it. I was asked about Omega XL. I said, you're wasting your money on Omega XL. That's I told my patient that. I'm saying to you, Linda, what I told my patient, that they were. I want to repeat this because you're looking at me with your eyes. I am not saying to the audience. I'm saying a patient asked me today, what did I think of Omega XL? And I said, he or she was wasting the money on that product. Because here, we are talking about complications of diabetes, and I would love people to ring in tonight if they have questions on this, because I had several patients today asking me, should they take aspirin every day? Why should a patient ask me that question? Because they have been somehow persuaded to think that aspirin thins the blood out too much and it's damaging their body. I had several patients asking me, should they take their cholesterol tablet every day? Why? Because they're being told that cholesterol tablets damage the liver. Now, we're talking about complications of diabetes. So why am I so aggressive and passionate? We have a new buzzword, Linda, in our faith community.
Passion buckets.
Our passion buckets. We are saying to our church and to our communities that we need to have our passion buckets filled. Well, my passion bucket in one area of my life is to talk very confidently and aggressively about science and medicine and diabetes. And Linda, I know sometimes you wince. You're a little bit cautious.
I don't think we can be too aggressive on television. Yeah.
Well, I need to be, because I am seeing a 45-year-old lady with 2 amputations. I'm seeing a 55-year-old man with 2 or 3 strokes because he didn't take his aspirin. He chose to take herbal products rather. And yes, I am passionate and I am open to be challenged. I am asking the herbalists out there, come onto our program. Let's talk about it. If we are confident enough to talk about science, let's do it.
So the number, if you want to call in, is
652.
4855.
So we're going back to hypoglycemia.
Yeah, how do we treat
Hypoglycemia.
with hypoglycemia?
So of course you do a blood test, and if the blood sugar is below 65 or around 50, then you want to take either a drink or something sweet that is about 15 grams of carbohydrate. Now, so therefore we need to teach our patients what a carbohydrate helping is, 15 grams. But basically we would say that maybe a quarter glass of orange juice or
Non-sweetened?
well, no,
Unsweetened
well, it
orange
doesn't.
juice?
No, well, in this case, it should be sweetened because the blood, you want to get the blood sugars up. Now, if your blood sugar is 30 or 40, you don't want to have a granola bar or a sandwich because that's going to
Take too long.
to be absorbed. So you want to take something fairly quickly. So you want to take a drink, or you may have a piece of chocolate, something that will raise your blood sugar. Now, in the UK, we had something that could be put on the gums that can be absorbed.
Immediately absorbed.
Maybe hypostop, it was called. Or you had a glucagon injection.
I think we have a caller on the line.
Sure.
Yes, so good evening. Can we have your question, please?
Good evening. Hello?
No, lost it? Okay. So did you want to continue on how to treat with hypoglycemia?
Right, so you've dealt with the immediate problem of hypoglycemia, and then you, about an hour later, you want to have a proper meal, but then, of course, you want to report that to your doctor or healthcare professional because you may need to have your medication reviewed. In other words, you want to find out why did you drop low. The one thing I didn't mention, Linda, was exercise.
Yeah.
Because if you are, especially on insulin, and you exercise very vigorously, you can drop your blood sugars. So while exercise is
necessary. Yeah.
I think we have another call.
Okay. Can we have your question, please? Good evening. Good evening. Can we have your question, please? No? Nothing?
Okay. So we seem to have some problems.
Technical hitches all around.
We apologize.
Yeah.
Probably during the break, we're going to try and
deal with that.
Yeah, because we really want the calls to come in because, while I enjoy talking, I can go on talking for the rest of the program.
Yeah.
I really want to entertain some of the calls. So I hope our technical team can sort out what the problem is.
Yes.
So we want to diagnose what caused that low blood sugar. So talking to your healthcare professional, trying to think for yourself, did I skip a meal? Did I exercise too vigorously? And just about the exercise bit, it's useful, especially if you're on insulin, that you do a blood sugar just before you start exercising.
Okay.
And if it's below 100, maybe you should take a little snack before you start exercising.
Okay, so that's hypoglycemia.
But just before we pause on that, I want to say, so why are we so concerned about hypoglycemia? Well, we know now that people who have really severe hypoglycemic episodes, you can have cardiac problems, heart problems. It prolongs what we call a QT interval, and you can have what we call an arrhythmia. So you can have abnormal rhythms of the heart, and you can end up with a heart event. Or if you really have a severe episode and you are unconscious, you can end up with a stroke.
Yeah, so those are the complications of
why
hypoglycemia.
Hypoglycemia, that's why we're so concerned.
Okay. Now, what about hyperglycemia?
So the opposite of hypo is hyperglycemia. And of course, people ask me, Dr. Khan, what is a dangerous blood sugar? Well, it's very difficult to put a level on what, we can define what a hypoglycemic, we have
I think we have a call on the line. Hope we get through with this one. Good evening. Can we have your question, please?
Hello?
Yes, hello?
Hello?
Yes, we're hearing you.
Can
we have-
calling from Meloni.
Yes, hello?
I'm diabetic too, and I listen in the program here.
Yep.
I sit down watching the program here. But I have a problem of going off.
Okay.
For the longest while, over 3 weeks now, I'm not going off properly. And I went to the clinic. I explained the doctor and them what's going on. They give me 3 tablets, what they call 3 little yellow tablets to go off.
Well, how old are you?
I think, and 62.
62, okay. So I'll just try and give you a summary of how I would approach this problem. So you can just look at us on camera. Anyone who is over, I would say, about 50 years old, and there's a change in bowel habit, it could be diarrhea, constipation, or if there's especially blood in the stool, I think it's an area of concern. We should not just assume it's due to dehydration or just give someone a laxative. Really, that patient should have a colonoscopy. The problem is access to colonoscopies. Having a colonoscopy under government service is almost, I'm not sure about that
Waiting
region,
list.
but it's a long waiting list. It's not even available in some regional health areas. So you should have a colonoscopy, or you could have a barium enema, which is a dye, to see if there's a blockage. But of course, diabetes can cause constipation because there's something called autonomic neuropathy, where the nerve ends to the bowel is affected and the bowel slows down, and you can have constipation associated with it. So basically what I'm saying to you, this should be investigated further.
Okay. Well, we're going into our second break now. When we come back, we'll be looking at hyperglycemia and the complications associated with it. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Okay, so QID means 4. And before the break, we were looking at the causes of hyperglycemia. So do you want to move on to that?
Right. So as I was saying, Linda, that patients ask me, what is a dangerous level of blood sugar? So there's no one level we can say it's dangerous. For somebody, 250 might be too high. For another person, 400. But the causes of hyperglycemia, might be eating too much, not enough medication, or it might just be illness or stress can send up your blood sugar.
We have a caller on the line. So, yes, good evening. Can we have your question, please?
Yeah, a pleasant good night, panel.
Good evening.
Good evening
I
to
just
you.
want to find out something.
Yes.
As Dr. Khan, as Ms. Khan mentioned a little earlier, the solid meal should be eaten for breakfast. And then as we go down during the day, lunchtime should be lighter and the dinner should be lighted. But what about fruits and vegetables could be added in the as we go through the day
Yes.
with the meals? Maybe you could give us a little rundown, with, a little guidance then.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's a good question. We talk about the food plate model, and again, I had a diagram of that. So basically, we are saying that yes, your biggest meal, if possible, should be in the morning, but at lunchtime, for example, you have a plate. About a quarter of that plate should be the carbs. So it can be rice, it can be more, maybe the basmati or brown rice, or ground provision is a good form of carbs. About half of the plate should be the vegetables and salad. So that's key. And then about a quarter of the plate, protein, more the white meat. So that's a kind of plate model, and then a piece of fruit. Now, different types of fruit there's different glycemic index associated with it. But apple, some grapes, or
I think
orange.
he was asking about between meals, if you could have. So I know that a lot of diabetics walk with like a little bag of almonds or raisins and
and that's high,
dried fruit.
And that's high fiber.
In between meals.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So hope that helps. But nutritionists are available, of course. We try and get one on the program soon. We keep saying that.
Yes.
We have about 10 more minutes left, so we need to run through the symptoms of hyperglycemia.
So increased thirst, increased urination, blurry vision, feeling tired, slow healing of cuts and wounds, more frequent infections, and that could be any type of infection. It could be a urinary tract infection. It can be, particularly in females, yeast infections, weight loss, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain. So there's a wide variety of symptoms there.
And how do we manage it? Very quickly.
Well, you're looking for the causes of the high blood sugar. So we started by saying if you're missing your medication, so for all of you who are choosing to take herbal remedies rather than take your insulin, for example, you're doing the wrong thing. I repeat, you're doing the wrong thing. The reason I say that is if we put you on insulin, we are saying that your pancreas is not producing enough insulin, and if you're omitting your insulin doses, what I'm saying is if you're coming to a medical doctor and you're seeking my advice, you need to follow my advice. I'm very straightforward about that. I'm not saying that you cannot seek the advice from others, but if you're coming into one of our clinics and you're seeking the advice of healthcare professionals, then we're trying to give you our best possible advice. And if you come back and your blood sugar is 500, I'm going to ask you, are you taking your insulin? And Linda, it's incredible how many patients will tell us, no, they have been without insulin for the last 2 months. Now, one of the reasons for that is sometimes not available, but sometimes people just choose to omit their insulins.
Or it's too expensive.
Too expensive to buy. So omitting medication, not having medication, eating too much. But the illness and stress bit is very important, because you may have an infection, for example, people with diabetic foot ulcers. There's a vicious cycle. There's an infection which may have been caused by the high blood sugars, but when the infection sets in, the blood sugars then can go up even higher. And therefore, you have to very aggressively treat these patients. Sometimes they need to go on insulin, they need to go on intravenous antibiotics, they need to be debrided. You need to deal with that. But stress, that's one we don't often think about. And even today, I had a few patients who admitted to me that they were under high levels of stress and their blood sugars were high.
And is that the program that we did on relationships was quite important too, you know, in terms of relationships being stressful and affecting our health. I think we have another caller on the line. Yes, good evening. Can we have your question, please?
Good evening.
Good evening.
Yes, hello? Hello?
Good evening.
Yes, we are hearing you.
Now. I am diabetic, right? And the doctor, when they give a Diaban and Diabital, whatever, they start giving me Glycinol and metformin. But I see, and they tell me whoa. But I see my sugar has to be high. What happens now sometime in the evening, I check my sugar. I want to check in the morning fasting. It might even be higher than the night. That's what I do understand. And then again, my sugar is like 182, 180, 175 on fast. I want to know that is ridiculously high over.
Well, 180, 190 is not ridiculously high. It's not extremely high, but what I would say to you is it depends on what type of the day you're talking about, because that's why we tell you that you should have the blood test called the HbA1c done. That's one of the A's of the ABCs, the A1C, because you need to know what that value is, because that will tell you what your average blood sugar has been for the last 3 months. But let me just say that metformin and glycinol are very basic tablets, and that's a problem we are having in the government service right now, Linda. We are very, very limited. We were about 2 years ago, we were supposed to get a tablet called Januvia, which is a new class of tablets, and it was approved, and for some reason it has never gotten the formulary. So here we are with a whole range of new tablets available, and unfortunately patients and the government service cannot access it.
In a country where it's been deemed as an epidemic.
As an epidemic, and so unfortunately a lot of those patients, if they end up going into a private practice and they then see a doctor, they can access, and if they can afford it, they get much better tablets and their blood sugars come down. So I would tell you, if you are on Diaban or metformin and your blood sugars are 180, 192, your diabetes it's not ridiculously high, but it's not well controlled. And you either need to talk to your doctors in the health center. They can actually prescribe a tablet for you to get in the private sector. So you may not need to go and see a doctor privately, because I was told that a patient came in to me and said a doctor in the government service said they're not allowed to prescribe any medications outside of the formulary. But that's not true. I prescribe tablets all the time. I ask my patient, can you afford to buy this tablet privately? And if the patient says yes, I give them a prescription. And then, so they may not have to come and see me privately and pay a consultation fee. I can see them on the government service and give them an appropriate prescription.
Okay. So we have 4 more minutes left, so I'm not sure if you have time to deal with further complications, because we're looking at macrovascular and microvascular.
We're going to have to come back to that
as a topic.
Yes. The one thing I was going to talk about was ketoacidosis, which is a short-term complications. And that is more common, well, it occurs in type 1 diabetes. That's where the pancreas is not producing any insulin at all, and especially young kids, they're on insulin, they miss their insulin, they might be busy for whatever reasons, their blood sugars go up.
It's hard to discipline yourself as a young child to do things.
But this is a very serious condition. This could be life-threatening. They can get nausea, abdominal pain. So I would say out there, if you have a young diabetic and they might be type 1 and they present to you with abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, you need to test the urine to see if there's ketones, and that patient may need to be hospitalized fairly quickly.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Yeah.
Yes, but it can be dealt with. It can be treated effectively.
Okay.
The patient needs to be admitted, needs to be rehydrated. They need to have arterial blood gas done, and they need intravenous insulin initially, and then the blood sugars will come down, and hopefully we can then get them with diabetes educators on the right insulin regime.
Yeah. Okay, so I know a lot of people have been calling in and telling us about the spiritual input that you make at the end of these programs. They seem to be appreciative of it. So I'm going to give you the next 3 minutes to work on that part of the program. Yeah.
Well, I just want to say, if you have any other questions, I know for part of the program we couldn't receive calls. You can ring us on 482-4269. 482-4269. That's the Anaposis Center. You can also look at our website, www.anaposiscommunity.com. And the Anaposis Center is really a center where we offer holistic health. We have the church, we have the medical center, we have the teaching arm, which is Lengua Linda. As I end tonight and I put on my pastoral hat, we've been talking about divine direction. I've started a 4-week teaching series at our church, the Anaposis Center, on divine direction. And last Sunday, I simply shared that God is often more interested in who we are rather than what we do. What do I mean by that? For many of us, especially our young people, we are thinking of careers. Should I become a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, a plumber, electrician? What does God want us to do? Well, God is more interested in your character development, in who you are. Are you the same in the dark as in the light? Are you the same in private as in the public? I want to say to you today that the small decisions you make will determine the outcomes in your life. Linda, many people think about the big decisions and they're looking for God to bring a big revelation in their lives. My experience is every small decision I've made will build into making the major decisions. So I want to challenge you tonight. Whatever area of life you're in, you might be a parent, you might be a son or a daughter, you might be an employee, you might be a pastor, you might be some area of church life. Make right decisions today, so God can reveal his plan and his purpose for your life, because indeed God does have a unique plan and purpose for your life. Why not discover it? Linda, I'll leave you to wind up.
Okay, well, that's all about character. I did want to share and say thank you to Raquel again for her Chris Anderson contribution to my jewelry this evening. And to end with a quotation that I came across this week. Harry Truman, President Harry Truman, several decades ago, once said, "It's amazing what you can accomplish when no one cares who gets the credit. When no one cares who gets the credit, it's amazing what we can accomplish as human beings." Ego is quite a thing. So thanks for joining us again on another edition of Your Health, Your Choice, and we look forward to another forum. I think we'll be looking at neurology in the next program. Good evening, and we'll see you in a fortnight's time.
The preceding program is in no way intended to replace your doctor's advice or treatment program, nor should it be used as a tool for the purpose of self-diagnosis.